largely because many of them had read the science fiction and they were seriously frightened by the singularity, and they didn't want to be responsible for that. But also, the Future of Life Institute put out a request that we have a moratorium or we abandon the development of lethal autonomous weapons. And I don't know exactly what the number was, but 2,000 scientists and a few hundred others of us signed. So we have a slightly different thing where the technological community is engaged in ways that has not been in the past. So I don't think that ends a pacing problem, or the Collingridge dilemma, but it has shortened the time between technological discovery and giving attention. The other place you see it is a lot of grants demand that the grantee demonstrate upfront what ethical things could go wrong if their research bears fruit, and what they're going to do to make sure that no harms take place during the development process, and what systems have to be in place to make sure that if this technology is made widely available, it will not do harm. Now, do we have all of those in place? No, we don't. We're in a universe where somebody can gene edit something tomorrow that they deploy in California, or that just gets out of the lab, and we have a new COVID crisis, or we have a major defoliation crisis, or we have the extinction of a few species just because some characteristic of this plant or animal that was allowed to go out in the wild caused the collapse of ecosystems.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of very important insights there. So especially the sandboxing that we can promote from the Startup Societies of Better Societies, where we're bringing together the founders, the researchers, the policymakers, the investors, the government agencies all together, so that we can look at these problems and attack them from different angles of expertise simultaneously.
To do that on the level of safety and security, particularly when you're talking about even the possibility of artificial superintelligence, of existential risk. But the problem is it's easier said than done. There's getting to be a consensus. I've followed this for years now, that COVID escaped from the Wuhan lab rather than being in a monkey that was sold in the Wuhan market. I don't know which is true, but that it escaped from the Wuhan lab is totally plausible. Different bodies that have studied this have disagreed, but we're in a climate in America now where the bodies that say it did escape from the Wuhan lab get more currency than those who said that wasn't the way it was promoted. But look at what the impact was in terms of millions of lives. And, if we had not had another technology, RNA research, that allowed us to create vaccines relatively quickly, the impact of COVID could have been comparable to the Spanish flu at the end, pretty much, of the First World War, that killed 5% of the world's population.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to another question here. What concrete pivotal moments in AI governance can nimble ethical interventions shift the global trajectory? I'm assuming we're trying to get to what are the 20% most effective ethical interventions that can be done to shift the global trajectory as much as possible.
I think the most important one is to take steps toward international governance of AI. Now, what that international governance does and doesn't do is not necessarily put in place a lot of regulations. And we certainly don't want to bureaucratize everything so much that it's a headache, but we need it to be dealt with on a higher level, which is, you don't set artificial general intelligence as a project unless you put appropriate investment into safety and security, and you have a plan, and it has been reviewed by other experts outside of your company. I mean, it's that kind of thing that we need. There's some worldwide things that can't be managed without worldwide regulations. So I have been proposing going back to the World Consumer Congress in Nairobi 2 years ago, that we actually start with something very basic, which is an international regulation against scams. Nobody would really disagree with that I know of it, other than the scammers. And interestingly enough, the Pope came out with something similar about a week later. We're not sure whether the two influenced each other or not, but it doesn't really matter. That's an example of something on an international level we can do. But this is more about bringing together leaders on an international level, putting in place protocols, soft law more often than hard law, being able to give a comprehensive overview of to what extent we really have investment in safety and security. Right now, we have very little investment in that. The investment is nearly all about who's going to win the race to artificial general intelligence. And so, that we start functioning as a world around these questions and not as a bunch of competitors, because most of them are about the interests of the world at large. And yes, it's going to be to the disadvantage of some. And I started with Anya Kaspersson, the AI inequality initiative. People weren't talking about equality. We started this initiative. Just a small thing, but now equality is everywhere. People are talking about it. AI is going to exacerbate structural inequalities. That's not, and that is becoming worse when we're giving tax breaks to the AI oligopoly and, giving them freedom from even minor regulations or obligations to be investing in ethics and safety. They all say they're doing it, but most of it's ethics washing. Most of them is the companies want to look like they're being responsible, but there's not a lot of evidence that they are.
Yeah. And I would definitely add to this that I think, as you mentioned in the presentation, testing and extensive red teaming are more important than ever. And showing that, we are living in a world that does operate through some game theoretic principles. And so we have to assume that there will be bad actors that will try to maximize whatever their goals are for nefarious purposes or malicious reasons. And having that early testing and red teaming your product or service or AI models from the leading players and that being demanded from the public, I think is just a very basic necessity that we would need.
And the leading players are also the governments and the military. So I would like to see something on the AI front, which would be the AI equivalent of what the IAEA does, the International Atomic Energy Commission. So, I mean, ostensibly, they're visiting sites. They know how much enriched uranium countries have. Until the countries try and hide it, but they can't. Enriched uranium is hard to hide because it does show up in, on radioactive meters and so forth. But in AI, I think it would be very different. I would just say, if militaries are deploying AI, it's not as if the international body has to know how much AI you have. But there should be a review of whether it's been implemented in a safe manner, but it's not likely to have an accident that decimates it. I mean, the one thing about there were accidents during the Cold War, but it wasn't likely to be an accident where somebody could push a button and that was it. Some crazy that could push a button. Whether Khrushchev was a crazy or whether some of our presidents were crazy, that's a different story. But the point is, it would be hard to set in motion the Third World War. AI is going to make it easy, particularly if you give it oversight in any form or another of releasing a nuclear weapon. Now, presumably, nuclear weapons, if the lethal weapon was nuclear, would be under the atomic energy protocols, the safety protocols. But that's not even guaranteed, let alone some of the weapons we have created are as powerful as at least low-level nukes, if not some of the bigger ones.
Shift gears a bit and see if we can get through as many of these as possible. What are the most effective models for combining hard and soft governance that startup societies could adopt? I think this is also something that we've already touched on with all the different frameworks and.
Yeah, no, I think governments just have to acknowledge that if they're loath to put in heavy-duty regulatory practices because they don't quite know what the effects of those will be, we'll have these put in as standards by standard setting bodies. Have the governments encourage companies to experiment with these different approaches. And then when it becomes clear which approaches are particularly effective and you have ways to ameliorate the risks, and then you